Okay. So welcome to Orthodoxy 101. Like I said, like I was telling everyone before you got here, that we're getting to the end of this sort of round of catechism. So we're going to start covering somewhat the spicier topics, somewhat the more controversial type topics, or just the more potentially disturbing topics. So tonight we're going to be talking about the end times because that is part of what we believe, and it's important that you know about it. And we'll get so. 101, we're talking about the end times, that is to say, the end of the world, how all of this is going to come to an end. Okay, well, just by way of introduction, let me say that everything we know about the world tells us that it will one day have an end. Virtually every religion or mythology I'm aware of taught that this world had a beginning and will eventually have an end, even if it's only the end of this world within the context of an eternal cosmic cycle. So even in Hinduism, where you had the creation and destruction of an infinite amount of successive worlds, you still had something like, I believe, the Kali Yuga, which was the end of the time and the end of that cycle in preparation for the beginning of another one. So everyone has always believed and taught that the world will end, even if it's going to begin again. And so at the beginning of the 20th centuries, most scientists favored the idea that the universe was eternal. Actually, the current mainstream scientific models of the universe tell us that the universe had a beginning, which we know as the Big Bang. It will not remain as it is forever, but will instead come to some sort of end. So if you've heard of concepts like the heat death of the universe or the Big Crunch or something, these are cosmological models come up with by scientists to describe what's going to happen in the far distant future, which will, for all intents and purposes, be a sort of end to the universe. Again, even if in some of these models it comes back again. But we already this bigger scale knowledge is already something we know on a much smaller scale as well. No person has lasted forever. No nation has lasted forever. Even things like species and continents and stars are born and then die. So we know about, stars go supernova, they have a life cycle, and eventually they explode and burn out. Continents like Pangaea or Rodinia have, existed in the past. Geologists have pieced together, but they no longer exist now. Species, dodo birds no longer are walking the earth, all the various types of dinosaurs, so on and so forth. So we know that even these other things don't last forever. We also know that we ourselves will someday die, and in a real sense, this is a sort of end of the world for us. It's often said by Orthodox spiritual and theological writers that man is a microcosm. Man is the world in miniature, because we, by our act of perception, seeing, knowing, and understanding the world around us, we take the world into ourselves. And so when we die, it's as though a miniature version of the world itself is dying. But it's also, on a much more practical level, that's the end of the world for us. We're no longer participating in the world at the moment we die. The world will go on without us. So all I'm trying to say, hi, welcome, Maureen. So all I'm trying to say is that no matter where we turn for an authority on truth, whether we're Orthodox Christians, or whether we only trust the modern scientific consensus, or we believe something else, wherever we turn for an authority on truth, we are confronted with the fact that this world is going to end. This is a proposition no one will deny. I think maybe there, like in the 1800s, late 1700s, early 1800s, I remember reading some theories. Like the Charles Lyell, I believe it was a geologist who had the theory that the world has basically just always been as it is and will always continue to be as it is. No trace of a beginning, no semblance of an end, or some quote like that. But at least in the modern day, no one from any part of the religious philosophical spectrum really believes this world is going on forever. However, we must be careful in examining specific information we get, right? Okay, we all agree in the general picture that this thing that we call the world can't last forever. But what is our source about, what particular information about how it's going to end or when it's going to end? What exactly is our source saying, and how much weight can we give to the testimony of our source? Because even though everyone believes in an end, people vary quite wildly about what the end is going to look like, how it's going to be brought about, when it's going to come. What's our time frame that we need to be worried about, for instance. And so on and so forth. So for instance, scientists who tell us ideas about like the heat death of the universe, the Big Crunch, are doing so based on real data from physics and astronomy, but they're also necessarily relying on a number of unprovable assumptions. Generally, they're observations that, okay, the universe expanding right now, and it's continuing to expand. So if we project far into the future that the universe keeps expanding, then all the galaxies are going to separate, and then the planets, then things will just become so separated that the heat will die out. Well, but of course, that's based on assumptions, right? That's based on assumptions that there is no God behind the scenes who's actually going to enter into the universe and manipulate things, or it's also based on the assumptions that there are no scientific principles that are actually going to counteract that or change that. So anyway, anytime you read about that stuff, and I remember reading like in Scientific American one time when I was 8, which I shouldn't have been, like, or maybe I was older than that. I can't remember. I read about that sort of thing at one point when I wasn't supposed to, and I was terrified, and I had no.
Like the first time you learn about a supernova, you're like, oh, the sun's gonna explode.
Yeah. So you start getting, you can get really existential really young. Maybe I wasn't 8, maybe I was more like 10 or 12 or something, but I was young and it was freaky. But you have to understand that these are just assumptions. They are based on real data, but there's a lot of projection going into it. So in order to know with a degree of certainty what the future holds for us, we need to turn to the only source who would really know, at least from our perspective as Orthodox Christians, which is God, the true God, the Holy Trinity. It's not that everyone else's projections or prognostications are false necessarily or irrelevant, but it's just that it's never. The last word is going to be whatever God tells us about the subject, and everything else will have to fit in as pieces of that much bigger puzzle, if we are to accommodate that. So we turn to God, we turn to the Holy Trinity, we turn to Jesus Christ, who told us some things about what's going to happen to the world. Preaching about the end of time was central to the teaching of Jesus Christ and the apostles. So at very least, the 3 synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, each contain about an entire chapter of Jesus' preaching about the end time. It wasn't just a small sort of side footnote here, but it was a protracted sermon that Jesus gave to his apostles, going into some degree of detail. Likewise, the apostolic writings, so the other parts of the New Testament. So, St. Peter talks about the end of time, St. Paul, obviously, and especially St. John in the book of the Revelation. The apostles were very, very clear that the time is coming to an end, and they never put a date on it. They never put a date or a time on it, but there was definitely a sense of urgency, and certain passages suggested that the apostles did believe that the end would come in their lifetimes. Again, this was tempered somewhat. So when St. Paul found out that some of the Thessalonians were quitting their jobs because they thought Jesus was coming so soon, he writes in Second Thessalonians, okay, don't quit your jobs. Like, it's not, this is an urgent thing, and this is something we need to be prepared for, but it's not coming in exactly such a way that you don't just drop everything right now and sit on your butt and wait. It was more nuanced than that. So there was a strong sense of urgency among the apostles, among the New Testament writers, that the end times are coming soon. But this was balanced. This wasn't just standing on a street corner with a sign that the end is near. Just give up everything. It was balanced by statements that like Jesus Christ, that no one knew the day or the hour. So, like I said, Jesus gave at least one long sermon to his disciples, prophesying the destruction of Jerusalem and detailing what would happen at the end of time. And although he gives us a good bit of detail, of course, there's still many unknowns, not the least of which is the timing of the end itself. So even though he goes into a certain degree of detail, he really and gives us some sort of general predictions about what's going to happen before the end. It's really, really hard to pin to a specific date and time. While Jesus himself gives us the most clear information about the end, his direct teaching is supplemented in the New Testament by the letters of the apostles and the book of the Revelation, which was composed by St. John the Evangelist. Now, the book of Revelation, by the way, it is the Revelation or the Apocalypse. It is not Revelations. That's a small point, but a lot of people call it Revelations. That's not the name of the book. It is singular, Revelation. Or apocalypse, whatever you want to call it. They mean the same thing, the revealing of something. So the book of the Revelation is the longest description of the end times in the Bible, but is loaded with highly symbolic language and is notoriously difficult to decipher. So, for instance, the fathers of the church do teach on the book of Revelation. They do have explanations of it, but there's a reason in the Orthodox Church we do not read the Revelation in church. We do not read it publicly in church at any point throughout the liturgical cycle for the year. It's the only book of the New Testament that we never read in church, because it's a very difficult book. And obviously, if you've read it, you know that. Highly symbolic, a lot of strange things going on. You know, beasts with 10 heads and 7 horns, and you know, all sorts of fantastic stuff that needs to be it's difficult to parse out, you know, what's literal, what's symbolic, what are the symbols referred to. So we're not going to go, that's my long way of saying we're actually not going to go too much into the Revelation here, but largely because I'm not qualified. You know, there's a bunch of lectures online from a Greek priest named Father Athanasios Mytilineos, who's a great authority on the book of the Revelation. Would definitely look those up, listen to those, or read them. We're going to stick more to what Jesus and the other apostles had to say about the end times. But perhaps the most significant detail these writings add to our knowledge. So we said Jesus gives the first big broad outline of the end times. So the biggest detail that the apostolic writings add is the end of the world. They involve this shadowy figure known as Antichrist, or the man of lawlessness, or the man of sin, or the beast, or an evil individual who will come before the second coming of Christ and will try to deceive the world. So there are a lot of details in these prophecies, and let's just get to them. So the first thing we're going to look at is the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 24. And this is one of, like I said, the first 3 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, are called the Synoptic Gospels, which in Greek literally means, you know, those who synopsis, those who look together, those who see in a similar way, because they share a lot more material than any of them does with the Gospel of John. So Matthew 24 is the gospel, is one of the synoptic recordings of Jesus's speech about the end times, and we're going to read, I believe, the entire chapter. Okay. By the way, for those of you who are reading online, I'm reading the New International Version, not because it's my preferred translation. You know, people make jokes about it. They call it the NIV, the nearly inspired version, because it's, you know, it's a little casual. I'm using it for our purposes here because it's very readable, and it's pretty simple and straightforward. It's not the most accurate. It's not the most insightful or wise one, but it's quite readable. So anyway, okay. Jesus left the temple and was walking away when his disciples came up to him to call his attention to its buildings. Do you see all these things? He asked. Truly, I tell you, not one stone here will be left on another. Everyone will be thrown down. So we are going to talk a little bit about the temple in a minute, but suffice it to say, when we're in Jerusalem, we're looking at the temple. These are the center and highest point of Jerusalem at the time. These are very big buildings that Jesus is talking about. And, you know, this was an era before explosives. So it's quite remarkable that he's talking about these buildings, these very large and majestic buildings being destroyed. As Jesus was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately. Tell us, they said, when will this happen? And what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? Jesus answered, watch that no one deceives you. For many will come in my name, claiming, I am the Messiah, and will deceive many. You will hear of wars and rumors of wars, but see to it that you are not alarmed. Such things must happen, but the end isn't still to come. Nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these are the beginnings of the birth pains. So on one level, Jesus is stating from the outset that these things are not going to happen immediately, right away. Of course, now at this point, 2,000 years have passed. But he is warning us ahead of time that this is not something that he was expecting an immediate fulfillment of. Then you will be handed over to be persecuted and put to death, and you will be hated by all nations because of me. At that time, many will turn away from the faith and will betray and hate each other, and many false prophets will appear and deceive many people. So it's very interesting that he's talking. We're talking about this is Jesus speaking before he's risen from the dead. Christianity is an incredibly small movement at this point. So he's already talking ahead of time that many people will turn away from the faith. Well, many people aren't even part of the faith yet. It's just interesting. Because of the increase of wickedness, the love of most will grow cold, but the one who stands firm till the end will be saved. So these are hints of what has been talked about is maybe the great apostasy, whereas before the end times, very many people will turn away from Christ. Of course, that requires that many people believe in Christ beforehand in order to turn away from Christ. But many will turn away from the faith. The love of most will grow cold, but the one who stands firm in the end will be saved. So it's not, there's some wiggle room in interpretation here, but it does seem to imply that Christianity, or at least authentic Christianity, will be something rather small on the face of the earth when it's time for Jesus to come again. And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. So all people groups, all nations will have an opportunity to repent and believe in the gospel, even if not every individual person. So when you see standing in the holy place the abomination that causes desolation spoken of the prophet Daniel, let the reader understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. So the abomination of desolation, if I'm understanding correctly, is the desecration of the temple, basically. So there's only one spot of Jewish worship, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. It's called the temple. That's where sacrifices are offered to God Most High. And it was desecrated at one point, at multiple points in the past, when it was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar, and then later when it was taken over by the Greeks, the Seleucid Empire, it was desecrated again. They offered pagan sacrifices on the altar, and so Jesus is talking about the desecration of the temple. So let the reader understand. And now, at least the way we read it, Jesus is pivoting. He's gone from talking about the general end of the world to specifically the destruction of Jerusalem. This did actually happen in 70 AD when the Roman Emperor Titus, crushing a Jewish rebellion, besieged and ransacked the city of Jerusalem and completely destroyed it. Like Jesus said, like did not leave one stone on top of another, flattened the city to the ground and all of its buildings. So I think this was something Jesus very publicly preached, and I can't help but believe that actually, I know from some of the writings like St. Justin Martyr that that the early Christians were using this as proof. Look, Jesus said this, and then it happened. So the fact that Jesus very publicly prophesied something dramatic that ended up coming true probably aided the cause of the early Christians. But so Jesus is here now talking about the destruction of the temple and the destruction of Jerusalem. And so Jerusalem was uninhabited for something like 50 years or so, and then it was resettled as Aelia Capitolina. I don't know Latin, but Jews weren't allowed in. So it was like a Roman colony settlement. And then, I don't know, Jews ended up back in it at one point, but not at that point in time. So when you see the temple being desecrated, then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let no one on the housetop go down or take anything out of the house. Let no one in the fields go back to get their cloak. How dreadful it will be in those days for pregnant women and nursing mothers. Pray that your flight will not take place in winter or on the Sabbath. For then there will be great distress, unequaled from the beginning of the world until now, and never to be equaled again. So that's a very big statement, obviously. If those days had not been cut short, no one would survive, but for the sake of the elect, those days will be shortened. At that time, if anyone says to you, look, here is the Messiah, or there he is, do not believe it. For false messiahs and false prophets will appear and perform great signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. See, I have told you ahead of time. So this is when we say in the Nicene Creed, and he will come again in glory to judge the living and the dead. What we mean by in glory is he's going to come in. Jesus, when he came into the world the first time, was hidden. You could look at him and not know you were looking at the Son of God. You could look at him and just see a nobody. When we say he's going to come in glory, we mean he's going to come in an unambiguous way, in a way that no one will be able to reject or deny him. And they'll have a perfectly clear understanding of who he is and what his relationship is to the world. So that's why if someone says he's the second coming of Jesus and it is not very obviously Jesus in the sky on the clouds, don't believe him. And that's what Jesus is saying right now. It's going to be unambiguous. There's going to be no doubt. For false messiahs and false prophets will appear and perform great signs. And so even if they perform miracles, in Christianity and Orthodoxy, we don't deny that, that people outside of Orthodoxy, outside of the church, can do things that are supernatural, or that seem supernatural. It just doesn't mean it's from God. So for false messiahs and false prophets will appear and perform great signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. See, I've told you ahead of time. So if anyone tells you, there he is out in the wilderness, do not go out, or here he is in the inner rooms, do not believe it. For as lightning that comes from the east is visible even in the west, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. Wherever there is a carcass, there the vultures will gather. Immediately, so this is now Jesus. We've pivoted somewhat, and this is difficult. This is difficult to understand. So on the one hand, he's talking about the destruction of Jerusalem, which did happen, a prophecy which did come true. And at the same time, he's segueing into talking about the end of the world and the coming of himself, the coming of the Son of Man. This has not happened yet, and it was not directly connected to the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. So what do we do with that? The short answer is we do understand these as separate events, one that's already happened, one that's taking place in the future. But I suppose there's no clear and straightforward reason why it was presented this way, why some of it has come true, but not all of it, except that God is giving us time on earth to repent. So immediately after the distress of those days, the sun will be darkened and the moon will not give its light. The stars will fall from the sky and the heavenly bodies will be shaken. And this is another place where we could be talking in terms of some kind of metaphor. Again, not that the end of the world is going to be metaphorical, but we know, in the modern day, we know that stars are very, very large and none of them is going to fall on the earth without, ending the world altogether. But actually, ancient people knew that as well. They had the ancient, sort of Greek astronomers had already sort of sorted out that stars were very large and very far away. So ancient people did have an awareness of more of what we would call scientific knowledge than we sometimes realize. So that's one of the reasons we can say, okay, what does Jesus mean when the stars will fall from the sky and the heavenly bodies will be shaken? It's not clear. Some people have interpreted that as the fall of rulers, because the heavenly in the Bible, heavenly bodies, the sun, the moon, the stars, constellations were associated with leaders, with empires and their fortunes, their rise and fall. So it's interesting. Then will appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven. That's taken to be interpreted usually as the cross. So the cross will appear in the sky. Again, this is something that happened with St. Constantine. St. Constantine was converted when he saw the cross in the sky. So these are not... These are interesting. Sort of the unfolding of God's providence in history comes in stages, perhaps. Then all the peoples of the earth will mourn when they see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with great powers and great glory. And he will send his angels with a loud trumpet call, and they will gather his elect from the four winds, from one end of the heavens to the other. Now learn this lesson from the fig tree. As soon as its twigs get tender and its leaves come out, you know that summer is near. Even so, when you see all these things, you know that it is near, right at the door. Truly, I tell you, this generation will certainly not pass away until all these things have happened. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. So there again is another difficult passage. He's certainly right when he says, he's certainly very literal when he says the generation he was speaking to did not pass away by the time destruction came upon Jerusalem. But as far as the end of the world, that hasn't happened yet. The people who lived in that generation are all physically dead at this point in time. This has been interpreted. The word generation is true in scriptures, is used in a lot of different ways, so it is kind of loose. It can refer to a generation of people. It can also kind of refer to like a race, or and so it's taken to be interpreted in this more broad sense is the church, the generation of Christians, the generation of those who believe in Jesus, will not be gone from the earth by the time he comes back. So even if Christianity is a small minority, small remnant, by the time Jesus comes again, it won't be fully extinguished. But about that day or hour, no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father. As it was in the days of Noah, so it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. So there are metaphors drawn in other parts of Scripture, like in the second epistle of St. Peter, I believe, to the days of Noah. I mean, the people were, as far as we know, Noah did preach repentance to the people around him before the flood came and wiped out the world. But ostensibly, many people, probably did not hear the message. They were just going around their normal lives, and all of a sudden the rains came, and that was the end of the world as they knew it, and the end of their own lives. So there are many parallels drawn between the end of the world in the future and the end of the world as it happened in the days of Noah, because that was also the end of the world. As it was in the days of Noah, so it will be in the coming of the Son of Man. For in the days before the flood, people were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, up to the day Noah entered the ark. And they knew nothing about what would happen until the flood came and took them all away. That is how it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. 2 men will be in the field, one will be taken and the other left. 2 women will be grinding with a handmill, one will be taken and the other left. Therefore keep watch, because you do not know on what day or your Lord will come. But understand this: if the owner of the house had known what time of the night the thief was coming, he would have kept watch and would not have let his house be broken into. So you also must be ready, because the Son of Man will come at an hour that you do not expect him. So notice again and again, this is the third time in the discourse Jesus has said, you don't know and you can't predict. This is the third time in this chapter Jesus has said that. So any of these ridiculous people who get out there and start saying, you know, it's going to happen on this date at this time, I'm certain of it. Well, guess what? They were wrong all those times. And there's no way they couldn't have been wrong, because if he says no one knows, that means no one knows. So it's pretty straightforward. Who then is the faithful and wise servant whom the master has put in charge of the servants in his household to give them their food at the proper time? It will be good for that servant whose master finds him doing so when he returns. Truly I tell you, he will put him in charge of all his possessions. But suppose that servant is wicked and says to himself, my master is staying away a long time. And he then begins to beat his fellow servants and to eat and drink with drunkards. The master of that servant will come on a day when he does not expect him, and at an hour he is not aware of. He will cut him to pieces and assign him a place with the hypocrites, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So Jesus telling us about the end times is not just a sort of giving us of an information, you know, like the way we talk about, you know, facts of history of things in the past, but there's a moral imperative deeply connected, which is that the fact that he is coming at a time we do not expect means that we have to live in a certain way. We have to live our lives with this sense of urgency, and with this sense that the decisions we make now, the way we choose to live now, has huge consequences, and therefore we can't be careless. So we can't beat our fellow servants. We can't eat and drink with drunkards. You know, we have to be temperate and moderate in all things and be kind to those around us, because we don't know when the world is going to end. And again, even if we live our entire lives without Jesus coming again, the world will certainly end for us. It's just as important to know that, you know, you make a wrong turn and you get, you know, T-boned by a semi-truck. Well, the world ended for you, even though Jesus didn't come back. You're going straight to you're going straight to what we call the particular judgment. So you should have been, and this is, you know, directed at myself as well, but you should have been careful about how you lived your life. You should have lived your life with some sense of preparation. So this is the big main prophecy of Jesus. You know, again, aside from the book of the Revelation itself, this is the sort of biggest teaching on the end of the world, and most clear teaching on the end of the world that you get in the New Testament. So first of all, any questions, comments, or concerns on the subject as of right now? Any interesting things that popped up you just wanted to remark about? Yeah, Benjamin?
I was curious about not even the Son will know. How does that interact with the Trinity?
Yeah, so that's an interesting one too, and that's always been, you know, it says not even the Son will know the day and the hour. So what does this mean if Jesus is the Son of God? And this enters in the mystery of, you know, what is Jesus Christ? Who is Jesus Christ? What does it mean to be God and man at the same time? And it's always been interpreted as saying Jesus as a human being doesn't know. Jesus as the Son of God, as the second person of the Trinity, does know. That gets us into weird territory, because, okay, does he have like two minds? No, he doesn't. It's a mystery that can't be reconciled, you know. It's a mystery that can't be made sense of, rather, like many other actions Jesus does. It's really hard to make sense of, well, how is he God and man at the same time? How is he an infant in a woman's arms and also holding up the whole universe? Who knows? But yeah, that's an interesting question. And the reason he says the Son does not know, we've always interpreted that as because as a human being, he doesn't know. As God, he does know.
It makes sense. So I've thought about when I was watching The Chosen, and it just, you know, occurred to me when I was watching it, and he says, Father, why have you forsaken me?
Mm-hmm.
Or I don't think that's coming in. I think maybe I'm thinking of something else. But that implies that there is some kind of human level to his physical brain,
right,
on Earth, that can't bridge some kind of gap there. Right.
Yeah. I don't know if I haven't watched that far in The Chosen, but if maybe it's the prayer in the Garden of Gethsemane, where he's, you know, he's on his knees saying, Father, if it be your will, let this cup pass from me. Like there is part of him the human fleshy part that doesn't want to go to the crucifixion. But and so as God, he's in perfect harmony with the Father, but as a human being, it's not that he's in disharmony with the Father, because he's willing to submit himself to the will of the Father. But there is that sort of potential for conflict there, because yeah, exactly.
It's interesting too, because you could see Daniel on this big tree.
Yeah,
that happening.
Yeah,
While not being there. So
Yeah.
it's clearly something.
Yeah, it's peculiar. Although a lot of the saints of the Orthodox Church have also been like that. They can see things that they had no earthly way of knowing. Elder Ephraim comes to mind. There was a very interesting one that I studied. Father Arseni Boca. He was a Romanian, but it was attested to by the people from the prison camp he was in. So he was imprisoned in a communist prison camp, and also apparently well testified that he attended his mother's funeral at the same time. Obviously not within the prison camp. So people from the prison camp testified that he was there in his cell, and they kept an eye on him. And people from outside said, "Yes, he was there. We saw him." So who knows? It's interesting, but that's what it means to be deified. Okay, Dawn. Yes.
I'm just curious because this isn't a topic that was brought up a lot when I was learning about Orthodoxy 30 some years ago. When I was a kid, being raised in just Protestant faith, I remember these terrifying movies, like Left Behind, I think it was. And I mean, just terrifying, and like they were brought up into the clouds and then lots of people were left. And in Orthodoxy, is there that rapture idea that people will just float up and some people will be left behind? Or
I think the short answer is yes and no, with the caveat I don't really know what the Protestants
okay
so I can't, maybe I'm totally mischaracterizing kind of what the idea of the rapture is. There does seem to be this element of people are going to be caught up in the clouds to meet God, whatever that means, right? But some people are going to be taken, some people are going to be left. But is this going to be this period of time on earth where just all the righteous people have gone up, and then all the sinners are left to just hash it out, and the devil's going to rule or whatever? That's I've never read a patristic teaching that says something like this. I think when the people get all snatched up, that's it. It's over. God's in control. That's my understanding.
Mine too, but thank you, Father.
No, yeah, of course. It's important because we, our vision of things are heavily influenced by media, which is out there. Even if I haven't watched Left Behind ever or read Left Behind, but I have I have seen things that parody it. So even like sort of a roundabout way, that cultural idea has sort of seeped into my mind.
I was like 7, 8 years old, and my parents thought it was good for us. They weren't trying to be bad or anything, but it was, I had nightmares about it. Well, throughout my childhood, honestly.
Because your mom sang the song while she was
cooking. My mom would sing the song while she was cooking. She felt like we were good, so we'd go up. So, it didn't matter or whatever. But I was a kid, and I thought it made me question, I thought, why would God do that? That doesn't seem very, very nice way of doing things. And it was just it was a whole series. I guess they did it again in the 90s, but the one, I was born in the 70s, so this was old school, and they didn't care too much about terrifying people. But I was just curious because I've read as much as I could about it, but there's not a lot, in Orthodoxy. And I understand why. I don't think it's the most important thing. I probably think it's more important how you live your life than worrying about how it all comes to an end. But I was just curious if that was anything that.
Well, it's a really good question, because that's how a lot of people's image of Christianity is sort of what we teach is. And again, there are continuities and discontinuities. There's some ways in which that sort of does capture what we teach, and other big ways that it's not true.
Right.
Yeah. Good. Okay. Good discussion. Yeah.
I wanted to add to the Not Even the Sun Will Know, that I have the Orthodox Study Bible, and it says I just as an alternative explanation. This is from John Chrysostom's teaching. Chrysostom teaches that this is not to be understood literally, but is a figure of speech, meaning that Christ, though he revealed all the signs that will accompany his return, will not reveal the exact date to anyone, and that believers should not be so brazen as to inquire of him.
Well, that if it came from St. John Chrysostom, that explanation obviously supersedes mine. It could. I do think my interpretation is a different patristic opinion, but anyway, either way, I can't cite it right now. So go with Marcus. Go with St. John.
Okay. I was just putting it out there.
No, I appreciate that. I appreciate that. So yeah, so that's Matthew 24. That is the big prophecy. So Christians in very many ages have believed they were living in the end times, and obviously they before now they weren't correct per se. I don't know of any ancient source that ever put a concrete prediction. There definitely have been church fathers who said, yeah, it's coming soon, but I've never ever heard of an ancient Christian source that put a date on it or anything like that. Like you go on Wikipedia and it says St. Martin of Tours made a prediction, and then I said that's weird because I've read the life of St. Martin of Tours and I don't remember him ever saying that. And then I tried to find a source for what was on Wikipedia, and then it led me to another source that I just think it has nothing. I think it's just made up. I don't know how these things happen. So anyway, don't trust like Wikipedia or something. But we Orthodox Christians are not in the habit of putting concrete dates on things. But very many have believed they were living in the end times. Nevertheless, following the words of Christ and using the apostles as an example, we should be vigilant and expect that Christ could return in our lifetime. So on the one hand, we can say that they weren't correct in that Jesus didn't come back in their lifetime. And on the other hand, they are a model for us to live. We actually, if we're going to be following them, we should be living with that expectancy. We should be living with that urgency. We should be living with that sense, that we could be snatched up into eternity at any moment. First of all, because it's true. And second of all, because that, gets us on the right track. But additionally, following the work of modern saints and writers, and in particular, Father Seraphim Rose, there may be a couple unique reasons to believe that our times may be closer to the end than we think. So on the one hand, I really, this is one of the reasons I was like, I'm hesitant to give a lesson like this, because on the one hand, I really don't want you to walk away and say, hey, Father Theo said Jesus is coming tomorrow or in a month or something, because that's not what I'm saying. But at the same time, there are these like interesting things that you do have to look at and take seriously, again, because we are living with that sense of expectation and urgency. So did you have a hand up?
I've always wondered this, even before I were in the Orthodox Church. Is there anything in the patristic teachings about what exactly happened? So I think about the whole thief in the night thing, and I'm thinking, well, if we die and instantaneously there's almost like a time skip, is there almost like a time skip for us? Because when we die, we're no longer in earthly time, and suddenly we may just, in a blink of an eye, be raised up in the resurrection, or
yeah, there is kind of that sense out there. I can't cite any particular source. I'm going to cite a slogan on a T-shirt, but there, if you know Death to the World Designs, they're kind of like an Orthodox kind of like punk group out in California. They're following in the legacy of Father Seraphim Rose. They're neat. They're interesting.
Priest now, the guy who started that.
Really?
Yep.
Oh, great. Okay. Well, they had this cool shirt that showed a monk in a coffin, and it said on it "Flight to Eschaton." What is the eschaton? The eschaton is the eschati mera, the last day. So okay, I'm citing a T-shirt right now, so asterisk. But yeah, I guess there is kind of this sense that your death is a fast track to the end of time, because like you said, as when we die, our relationship with time will certainly be different. We're certainly going to be entering into eternity at that point. So yeah, it could be that, like, how do we experience that? I have no idea.
It's almost like a thief in the night. If I get hit by a car and I drive out of here,
yeah, definitely. So look both ways when you're crossing the street out of here. But yes, so yeah.
I'd say we're going.
Yeah. Again, this could be very good news or very bad news, depending on where you're at. But reasons we may we may have to believe that Christ is coming soon. And again, every generation looked around and saw various reasons for them, but we're going to do the same. First, the love of many does appear to be growing cold. So you do have a mass exodus from organized Christianity across the formerly Christian world. I mean, you know, people living in America is more religious than most of the developed world, and it's always been somewhat of an anomaly in that effect. But you know, people who lived in Germany or Belgium or the Netherlands or the UK 200 years ago would be shocked at the degree of secularization and the complete disinterest in faith across these former hubs, centers of Christendom.
Post-Christian.
Yeah, it's a good term for the modern West, is to call it post-Christian. You cannot call the Netherlands a Christian country. You cannot call even I don't know if it has an established church or not, but even Sweden has an established church. It's very much not a Christian country in really any meaningful sense. But it's not a Muslim country either. It's not a Buddhist country. So the proper term would be post-Christian. That's what's in currency. So a lot of these great centers of Christianity collapsed in just a couple of generations due to a variety of factors. You remember Matthew chapter 24 verse 13 says, and because lawlessness will abound, the love of many will grow cold, but he who endures to the end will be saved. So this has always been an interpretation that, you know, Christianity will decline towards the end times. And now this is also recently, and because lawlessness will abound, the love of many will grow cold. So it seems to imply that the reason people will live, the people will abandon God will be because of immorality. At least that's a plain reading to what's obviously probably a very deep verse. But it is interesting. I read this really great book called American Grace by Robert Putnam, and it kind of tracks the history that, from a sociological perspective, the history of religion in the United States and its, you know, rise and fall, and so at least from the last 100 years or so. And what is most I'll just ask, I'll throw it out there. What is most correlated with the decline in religious belief? What beliefs or behaviors or set of beliefs or whatever? That's what you'd think. So a lot of people would say it's like something like science or education. Dawn raised her hand.
Just like moral decay.
Yeah.
You know, like sexual deviance.
Divorce. Yeah. So Brian was right. Actually, this book called American Grace, in a number, you know, using a ton of like graphs and sociological surveys, the thing most correlated with the decline in Christianity is beliefs about sexual behavior. So first, in the 1960s, the first great collapse of Christian faith was correlated with a rise in belief that premarital sex is okay. It wasn't nearly so correlated with a rise in education or scientific literacy. These things may have been involved and had some effect, but they were the effect of science on religiosity was dwarfed by the effect of changing sexual attitudes on religiosity. So again, it's interesting that it might this would suggest that yes, science and changing philosophical outlooks play their role, but it does seem the biggest single factor seems to be attitudes that relate to one's sexual behavior. So the first big wave in the 60s with premarital sex, and then the second big wave starting in the 90s with homosexuality being most correlated with the decline in Christianity those years. Actually, Christianity went back up somewhat in the 70s and 80s because people were horrified by the 60s, is what it seemed to be. And then, so that was, Billy Graham, Campus Crusade for Christ, that era, and then that kind of decline. Anyway, it's a fascinating book called American Grace. I'd recommend reading it. So this prophecy is, and others have traditionally been interpreted as large-scale apostasy from Christ as sin and immorality become more and more brazen. So, I mean, that's what we're seeing right now, right, in the United States and Western Europe. This is exactly what we see in Western Europe, and to a lesser extent, I've written what I was already going to say, and to a lesser extent, the United States, where religious belief has declined over the last 100 years, actually specifically since the 1960s. People actually, in many places, became more religious after World War II, during and after World War II, and up, at least in the United States, up, it climbed until it hit the 60s, and then all hell broke loose, and everything changed within a generation.
Do you think it's like what's unique about the 60s that caused that?
So that I think that is discussed in American Grace, but I think it's a confluence of factors. I think my own perspective would be, first of all, the 1950s was the most religious time ever in history in the United States. So like even actually perhaps more so than some of the Great Awakenings. Like you had time in the 1950s when more than 50% of the United States population was in church every Sunday. That's a huge number. And so I do think it could be on a large scale, especially with unprecedented prosperity. Maybe people were really feeling suffocated by that to a certain degree, or maybe they saw a lot of hypocrisy. If everyone's going to church, that means a lot of people are going to church probably for the wrong reasons. There was also things like, the widening availability of psychedelic drugs. There was the Vietnam War, which, perturbed a lot of people. Then the Civil Rights Act of 1960. So you had these big, and this was when the baby boomers were all coming of age, right? So the people born in the late 40s were all becoming teenagers. Oh, and you had a TV in every household. So it wasn't just one factor, but like this huge cocktail of factors came together in the 1960s to cause these like huge societal changes, which upset, a lot of the stability of previous generations. That's what it seems to be. So it's not just one straw that broke the camel's back, but a bunch of big unprecedented changes happened in a short period of time that totally changed. And the widespread use of birth control too led people to have, in generations past, just having a restrained sexual morality was just the smart thing to do because babies and all that. But once widespread birth control, it kind of changed the calculus, I think, for a lot of people.
Marijuana have a huge right at the Vietnam start of Vietnam.
I think so. Yeah, I can't say with certainty, but yeah, drugs, the use and availability of drugs, I think, exploded in the 60s. Roe v. Wade may have been in the 60s. I can't remember.
I think you're right.
It was the early 70s. I think 72.
Oh, okay.
Wade.
Well, anyway, we're living in the shadow of the 60s. That's what I got from this book. American Grace, really good book. Another book by the same sociologist called Bowling Alone. Every major societal trend in the United States that we're like experiencing now started in the 60s. So if you want to understand what's happening in our world, read about the 60s. Anyway, really, yeah. So anyway, it's a cocktail of things. That's a digression, but anyway, so religious belief has plummeted over the last 100 years, while sexual sins that were previously considered heinous, are now actively promoted in the United States. So these things that does seem to be kind of lining up with the prophecy of Jesus, and because lawlessness will abound, the love of many will grow cold. But it should be mentioned that this is happening in the United States, in Western Europe. It's Christianity is growing or holding steady in some places like Africa, Latin America, China, Iran. I've heard, I actually haven't gone in depth, so I don't know the details. I've heard Iran has had some like explosion of Christianity in the underground. Again, I don't know the details. Maybe it's exaggerated or something, but there are places where instead of declining, Christianity is growing. When in the Orthodox world, we have like Guatemala, which is a very successful mission there. Thousands. Guatemala, by percentage, is the most Orthodox country in the Western Hemisphere, because there's a big mass conversion in like around 2010 or something by a bunch of Mayans leaving the Catholic Church. But that's a whole story, that the details of which I don't know super well, but it's really cool. Albania, there's been a revival of Orthodox Christianity in Albania. That is really interesting. And of course,
Albania is like traditionally Muslim.
Well, Albania is traditionally Muslim, but like super duper secular Muslim, like super duper, like I don't want to use the word like apathetic, but like it's not. It is not Saudi Arabia. Yeah, from what I've heard, everyone in everyone who's told me about Islam in Albania is that it's not at all chauvinistic or aggressive. It's very chill. So it's interesting, but that helps people convert. And then places like Russia has seen a revival of sorts since the fall of communism. So it does seem in many places that the love of many is growing cold. Many people are falling away from Christ, but we do have reasons to temper that expectation, because maybe it's not a universal picture. Maybe it's just like kind of our experience that kind of colors our vision of the whole world. And so maybe this prophecy is not actually being fulfilled in our lifetimes, or it's just being fulfilled only locally. Another prophecy, Matthew chapter 24:14. And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a witness to all the nations, and then the end will come. So there is this expectation that all peoples, again, not necessarily individuals, but all peoples will have had a chance to accept or reject Christ. And we more groups of people than ever have had the opportunity to believe in Christ. There are very few people groups left on earth who have not had some contact with Christians or Christian missions. A notable exception would be the people of North Sentinel Island in the Indian Ocean, who killed a missionary who's never been contacted by a developed world successfully. And they killed a missionary, I think, a few years ago when he just kind of showed up in a rowboat. But that's what they do. So,
they have you mind if I sidetrack?
No, please.
They have a really fascinating story, because there was actually, I think it was a British husband and wife duo that like got really close to contact them. Like they were giving water to each other and all this kind of stuff. But there was some, like, I think the Indian government kind of put a stop to it. They wouldn't talk to anybody else. But for some reason, this like one husband and wife duo was able to get pretty close. Like they were talking basically.
Fascinating. So they were all, the North Sentinelese were almost contacted.
They were basically, they basically were. They were like trading with them and stuff and everything like that. They just didn't know language. So
interesting.
But other than that,
So there are very few people groups in the world that are still at this point in time totally isolated, or have never had contact with Christianity. The North Sentinelese would be one of them. I think there's some groups in the Amazon rainforest in Brazil. I don't really know the details. But we are getting close to a point of Jesus's prophecy being fulfilled, where everyone at least had some opportunity. Again, your average Saudi living in the modern day doesn't know much about Christianity, and what he or she knows is probably quite distorted, but at least it was kind of presented. So again, this could be another reason to believe, well, maybe Jesus has almost nearly fulfilled his mission in preaching the gospel in that sense, but maybe it doesn't count, because a lot of this is different various forms of Christianity. Maybe it needs to be Orthodox Christianity, which is going to take a good bit longer to get out there. We're working on it, but we have to admit we're slow. So maybe for that reason it's not close to being fulfilled. Who knows? Perhaps heretical Christianity isn't enough. It maybe specifically Orthodox Christianity, which must be preached to all nations, and this is more possible than ever now that we have the internet, and it's certainly it's been utilized quite well in the last several years, but we still have a long way to go. So that's so we're talking about reasons we could believe that we're living in the end times. Well, the first is we are living in a mass apostasy of Christianity. Is it the final mass apostasy? I don't know, but it could be. We are closer than ever to the gospel being preached to all nations. That's true. Dawn sent a YouTube video. What is that? I can't watch it right now.
Sorry, I didn't mean to send it right this minute. I just wanted everyone to have it. It's called The Island. It's a Russian movie, but has English subtitles. Just really good. I thought maybe somebody else would enjoy it free on YouTube.
Oktpov. Yeah, it's Ostrov in Russian, but like the way the Russian character is spelled Oktpov. Yeah. Great movie. Okay, so reasons we might be in the end time, we could believe that we're in the end times reasonably is, mass apostasy from Christianity, closer than ever to all nations having heard the gospel, and the coming of Antichrist is more possible than it ever has been before. So first, before we talk about Antichrist, and we're going to go probably 15 minutes over again, but not longer than that. So first, before we talk about Antichrist, let's talk about the temple. It's important. We're going back into the Old Testament for this, but for those of you who don't know, you really ought to know. So go back way back to the Old Testament, to the 5th book of the Bible, to Deuteronomy. Look at chapter 12, verse 8. So I'll give you a second. The 5th book of the Bible, Deuteronomy, chapter 12, verse 8. We're going to talk about what the temple is, just because you need to have that background knowledge if we're going to talk about this. So when we talk about the temple, we are talking about, there was only actually one place in the ancient Israelite religion where you could actually worship God in the proper sense of offering sacrifices. Because again, in the Bible, to worship specifically, and its most deepest meaning of worship was to serve and to sacrifice. And in the Bible, you could only sacrifice in one place, which was the temple. So even though synagogues, you had across wherever there lived Israelites or Jews, these were places of teaching only, where you would hear the word of God, but you couldn't offer worship in the formal sense because you couldn't sacrifice there. Everyone had to come to Jerusalem, only to the temple, to make their sacrifices. So Deuteronomy chapter 12, verse 8, it's God laying down the mandate to have a temple. You are not to do as we do here today, everyone doing as they see fit. So this is while the Jews are living still in the wilderness, with a mobile temple called the tabernacle, which moves from place to place. So God is saying, okay, right now you're sacrificing in all these different places wherever the tabernacle moves, but in the future it's not going to be that way. Since you have not yet reached the resting place, because they don't have the promised land, since you have not yet reached the resting place in the inheritance the Lord your God is giving you. But you will cross the Jordan and settle in the land the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance. And he will give you rest from all your enemies around you, so that you will live in safety. Then the place the Lord your God will to the place the Lord your God will choose as a dwelling for his name, where you are to bring everything I command you, your burnt offerings and sacrifices, your tithes and special gifts, and all the choice possessions you have vowed to the Lord. And there rejoice before the Lord your God, you, your sons and daughters, your male and female servants, and the Levites from your towns who have no allotment or inheritance of their own. Be careful not to sacrifice your burnt offerings anywhere you please. Double underline that sentence. Be careful not to sacrifice your burnt offerings anywhere you please. Offer them only at the place the Lord will choose in one of your tribes, and there observing everything I commanded you. So this is the Lord talking about the temple, which would be built in the reign of who? In the reign of Solomon, in Jerusalem, after David conquered Jerusalem. So in the ancient Israelite religion, and I am distinguishing that somewhat from modern day Judaism, because they are different in fundamentally in practice. So the religion, of the Old Testament, of Moses and Joshua, and David and Solomon, we would say is different from what's practiced as modern Judaism today, because it revolved around sacrifices and it revolved around the temple. And you cannot practice it right now. Why? Because there is no temple. As we said, the temple was destroyed in 70 AD by the Roman Emperor Titus, and it was not rebuilt since. It was the pagan emperor Julian the Apostate tried to rebuild it to kind of prove Jesus' prophecy a lie, and anyway, he failed due to some divine intervention that secular historians have interpreted as a natural disaster. But clearly, God stopped him from building the temple again. And then since about the 700s, it's been the place of the temple has a big mosque on it called Al-Aqsa. Dawn, you have raised your hand?
Yes, I'm sorry. I'll be quick. I don't know if you all have seen about the, I think 4 or 5 perfect red heifers that they took from Texas. I think they genetically bred them to be perfect because they need to be sacrificed for the new temple to be built according. They're there in Israel and they have an altar, and it's supposedly going to be done before the end of Pentecost. The heifers are there. They're going to do it, but what that means, I don't know, but just an interesting.
So that is relevant to where we're going with this. So they're not going to sacrifice it at the site of the temple. Those like in this specific iteration, they're not going to sacrifice it.
Yeah, like on a mountain overlooking it. They say it has to be looking in the direction of the temple, and it's very complex what they're doing.
Yeah. So again, if you actually read the Old Testament, if you read the Torah, you know that a huge amount of it, the first 5 books of the Bible, revolve around how to properly offer sacrifices to Yahweh. How to properly, like the book of Leviticus has details about how you offer, you cut up the animals and offer their, burn them in offering to God. So it's been not possible to do that for about 2,000 years. For people wanting to practice, historical Judaism or Israelite religion, whatever you want to call it. Wait, did you say something? Okay. So anyway, so number one is there's only one temple in the Old Testament where you can legitimately worship Yahweh through offering sacrifices. And that has been destroyed for almost 2,000 years and hasn't been rebuilt again. And for that reason, we would say the religious system of Jesus' day is over. That's why we believe Orthodoxy is the true manifestation of the religion of Jesus Christ, because that old religious system, which revolved around sacrifice, cannot be practiced anymore. So there's only one temple where you could practice that. And now if you'll turn all the way to 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 1, we're going to talk about the significance of the temple as it relates to the end times. So understand there was only one temple. It was the heart of ancient Israelite religion, and it's been destroyed and hasn't come back in 2,000-ish years. So then now we're talking about the man of lawlessness, aka the man of sin, aka Antichrist. So this shadowy figure who we don't know too much about, but who's going to come before Jesus and cause problems. So concerning the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ and our being gathered to him, we ask you, brother. So this is Paul writing to the people of Thessaloniki. I don't know how it was called. Concerning the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ and our being gathered to him, we ask you, brothers and sisters, not to become easily unsettled or alarmed by the teaching allegedly from us, whether by a prophecy or by a word of mouth or by letter, asserting that the day of the Lord is already come. Don't let anyone deceive you in any way, for that day will not come until the rebellion occurs and the man of lawlessness is revealed. So Paul is saying before Jesus Christ comes, some kind of rebellion has to occur, rebellion against God, we can surmise. And the man of lawlessness, Antichrist, this evil figure has to come before Jesus comes. The man doomed to destruction. He will oppose and will exalt himself over everything that is called God or is worshipped, so that he sets himself up in God's temple, proclaiming himself to be God. So this is central to the prophecy of Antichrist. And when Paul was writing this letter, the temple still stood. This was written believed to have been written in the 50s or 60s AD, so before the destruction of the temple. So when Paul could still point to the temple and say, that's where Antichrist is going to go and be worshipped as God. Don't you remember that when I was with you, I used to tell you these things? And now you know what is holding him back, so that he may be revealed at the proper time. For the secret power of lawlessness is already at work, but the one who now holds it back will continue to do so until he is taken out of the way. So there is some force holding Antichrist back from coming into the world. It's not clear at all what it is. Some people have actually interpreted it as the sovereign, as a legitimate king appointed by God. As you know, there are no Orthodox monarchs on earth anymore. So some, Russians, especially around the revolution, thought that this was going to be the coming of Antichrist because the last legitimate Orthodox monarch was dethroned. And I don't know. It's an interesting perspective. Again, it's not obvious that that's what the text means, but that's one thought that's been out there. For the secret, but the one who now holds it back will continue. It could be referring to some kind of spiritual force holding it back. I mean, it's not obvious what the restrainer is. And then the lawless one will be revealed, whom the Lord Jesus will overthrow with the breath of his mouth and destroy by the splendor of his coming. The coming of the lawless one will be in accordance with how Satan works. He will use all sorts of displays of power through signs and wonders that serve the lie, and all the ways that wickedness deceives those who are perishing. So Antichrist he's going to come, but he's not going to be defeated right away. He's going to have a time to rise to power and to exercise that power over mankind. And he's going to have some kind of miracles or some spectacular way of convincing people to follow him. Again, this is very sparse on the details. We can imagine a million different things, and whatever the reality is will probably be different from whatever we imagine. They perish because they refuse to love the truth and so be saved. So he will have followers, and the fact that they follow him is bad news for them. It is a choice you don't want to make. For this reason, God sends them a powerful delusion so they will believe the lie and so that they will be condemned who have not believed the truth but have delighted in wickedness. Again, there's this connection in the Bible between, we think that believing something that's true is just connected to our rational faculty. If we have enough information, we'll make the right decision every time. But it's not true. Our wickedness or our righteousness affects heavily how we interpret the truth or falsity of certain things. And obviously we know that even sort of in the mainstream, we know that people have biases which heavily influence them. Even intelligent people, even, you know, scientists and great thinkers have biases of various types because of the way they live their life or because of what they want to be true or untrue. So it's not just a matter of having the right information. Our righteousness plays into whether or not we're going to end up following the lie or not. So Antichrist has to come before Jesus, and Antichrist has to be worshipped in the temple as a god. But there's a problem. The temple doesn't exist. And that's where what Dawn said came in and became incredibly relevant. We are living in a time that was inconceivable even 100 years ago, that the temple could end up being rebuilt. But you could go online and Google right now. There are hardline Jewish groups in Israel. First of all, the state of Israel didn't exist. Before 1948, there was not even a Jewish state there that would want to rebuild the temple. Not saying that the state of Israel wants to rebuild the temple now. It's factions within Israel. But, you know, before that, it was, you know, British Mandate of Palestine. Before that, it was the Ottoman Empire. So in the last 2,000 years, there hasn't even been a country that was willing to rebuild the temple. And now there is, or at least where it's conceivable that the temple would be rebuilt. And you can Google online, there are groups of hardline Orthodox Jews who want to rebuild the temple. They want to demolish Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is in the way, and to offer. So again, I'm not saying this is, you know, knock down obvious proof that'll convince an atheist, but it is very crazy that we are living in a time where it's at least conceivable that these prophecies from 2,000 years could actually come to fruition, when for 2,000 years the material circumstances were completely not amenable to that at all. Yes, Dawn.
The whole reason that came up, and please, this is no prophecy for me. I just had a dream, but I had this dream that, you know, there's been so much going on over there that like the Muslim temple just like collapsed, like this dream, and it kept on collapsing, you know, just a dream. I woke up the next day and I said to Brian, I had the weirdest dream. You know, I'd probably been reading before I went to sleep. And he said, well, they've got the 4 heifers, the red heifers. And I'm like, I thought he was messing with me. And then he showed me and I was like, oh, that's a little weird, you know? So,
My goodness.
I don't want in any way say that that's prophetic. It was just an interesting thing that took me down a rabbit hole about what's going on over there.
Right. And so let's hope you're not a prophet. And
I hope
again,
to God.
I need to hedge as well. I'm not saying that Jesus is coming tomorrow or that this particular Jewish group is going to get their way and they're bringing Antichrist, so you need to stop. I'm not saying anything like that. So that's why I was, you know, hesitant to do this lesson, because, you know, people can misinterpret you or think you're a nut job. But it's just, it is crazy that these circumstances are coming about. And yeah, what the thing about the red heifers right now, the reason I don't take it too seriously is because it's not actually going to take place in the temple. They're going to do it at some place like
it's above it, looking over.
Above it.
Supposedly, the Orthodox Jews supposedly say that if you interpret the Torah right, that it's actually supposed to be taken on this mount looking at the temple. I mean, they have a whole theory, extreme Orthodox Jews, why it has to be done this way instead of in the temple. And they're always trying to take goats in the temple, like sneak them in there to sacrifice them, but they keep on getting caught by, you know, because they're not allowed to do that, of course. And
that brings me to another important point, that there are Orthodox Jews who've been trying to jam their way into Al-Aqsa Mosque. So before October 8th, I think, was when Hamas carried out that terrible attack on Israel. Like a few days before, a group of ultra-Orthodox Jews had stormed Al-Aqsa Mosque, trying to do some kind of... And
they had goats in their bags, like each of them. They were just trying to get one in there, you know. But
I'm not making this up. You can Google this. You will see the pictures. Like before, within the week preceding October 8th of 2023, there was an attack on Al-Aqsa Mosque. So like, it's not just that they're interested in doing it; they're trying. And also relevant is that the attack that Hamas carried out on Israel was called Operation Al-Aqsa Flood. So it was very consciously like in reference to the fight over the temple. So it like what is going on in the Middle East, again, it has like you don't hear it reported this way. It was reported this way by some Russian sources that I read, which was interesting. But for whatever reason, the Western sources just don't want to touch the religious dimension of this war that's going on right now. And again, there are multiple parties in this war fighting.
I have friends in Russia and in Israel. So I get some really interesting perspectives from both those sides of it, and then of course what anybody could read, as well.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, so again, there is a secular perspective you can have on this. It's not just the religious dimension, but there is a religious dimension
Yes.
going on. You just don't read about it on CNN or even
right.
like you see when I read it. I don't see people mentioning what to people on the ground over there is very real. They're very aware of. So it's just interesting. Anyway, so the coming of Antichrist. All I'm saying is, again, I'm not saying it's happening tomorrow. I'm not saying I'm not making any concrete predictions, but I am saying that it's more possible than it's ever been. The material circumstances are closer to being all in place than they have been since 70 AD. So that is a little weird. Like, this is what you might expect to happen if Christian prophecy were true. Another thing is, there are other things, and this stuff is, more related to the shadowy stuff of the book of Revelation, but concepts, there are beliefs out there that aren't necessarily specifically said in the Bible, but, logically follow that Antichrist is going to rule the entire world, or is going to establish one world government or one world currency. That sort of thing is more conceivable than it was when the book of Revelation was first reported. The technology was absolutely not there at the time, but it is now. You could conceive of a one world government now, of some kind of massive super surveillance state now that could not have possibly existed then. Again, not saying that it's happening, and not saying like, people go out and say, oh, it's the EU or it's the World Economic Forum, or I'm not saying anything like that, but I'm just saying it is conceivable. It is conceivable in a way that you couldn't conceive of 2,000 years ago. Benjamin.
Yeah. What you're saying all perfectly aligns as well to the emergence of like these crazy technologies that we have, like AI. And I've read about some conspiracy I can't corroborate at all called Project Bluebeam, where they're going to try and use AI to basically fake aliens coming to disprove Christianity. But conceivably, if you use that same technology, you like great signs and wonders and miracles and things that the Antichrist is going to be able to do. If the lines of reality become so blurred because you can't trust any picture, any video on the internet, they're projecting stuff with lights or whatever. I mean, look at these drone projections that they do nowadays in the sky. People could easily be convinced that something that's fake is going on just simply from those technologies.
Well, that's a really great point. Is that the second, what we read from 2 Thessalonians right now is that the Antichrist's whole thing is going to be deception, is going to be some kind of dramatic deceptions to get people to believe things. And like, we're living in an era now where deceptions are conceivable. Like, if you've seen certain deep fakes or whatever, deceptions are conceivable that couldn't have been dreamt of 2,000 years ago or even 100 years ago. So again, who knows when or how it's going to actually take place, but it's more conceivable than ever. It's become more conceivable as time has gone on, not less conceivable.
It's scary how rapid it is, though. Like 10 years ago, deep fakes are like, oh, that's fake. But now, just in 10 years, you literally cannot tell the difference between reality and an AI video. Yeah,
a principal at my old high school, actually, it was in the news. I think it made nationwide news, but it was my old high school, Pikesville High in Baltimore, Maryland. Some disgruntled faculty member did a deep fake of the principal's voice saying a bunch of like racist things or something, and it was completely fake, but it actually got him in huge trouble because it sounded exactly like him. I mean, the fact that technology is out there on such a level that just anyone can go and access, that's scary. First of all, that's horrifying, and I hope no one who has a really strong grudge at me is inclined to mess with that sort of technology. But anyway, so this sort of thing has become more conceivable, not less. Again, with the caveat, I'm sorry, I'm just so hedging a million times that I'm not making any predictions of any kind. We also have a conceptual framework that would allow Antichrist to perform wonders without reference to God or the supernatural. So like I said before, and I think about extraterrestrials, this is something Father Seraphim Rose talked about. It's like, if Antichrist came and it was like, hey, I'm Antichrist, I'm from the devil, and here are my fake miracles, everyone would be like, oh, we're not going to follow you. Or even if he said, I'm Antichrist, I'm the enemy of God, people would turn away from him. If Antichrist came and said, hey, I'm an extraterrestrial, these aren't miracles, it's just technology you don't understand. I just evolved on some planet far away. Everyone would, you could conceive of many more people following him and taking him as legitimate without any reference to Christ, that would not drive, many people into the arms of the church. So what Father Seraphim was saying is, there's a conceptual framework there now that wasn't there before, when everyone had some sort of belief in some kind of God, that could allow for someone to come and deceive in that way. It's interesting. And of course, we have to think of, certain global cataclysms are more possible than they were before. So now we're talking about the end of the world, and in a much more ancient time, it would be very difficult to imagine the world ending without an act of God. You'd need some worldwide flood or earthquake or fire from the heavens to destroy the world. Nowadays, we can imagine doing it to ourselves, whether we're talking about some kind of climate crisis, whether we're talking about nuclear war, or whatever the things people who are worried about AI are worried about. The end of the world is something that's very conceivable. The immediate end of the world through human hands is, you could imagine that happening tomorrow if everyone went crazy and decided to, press all the nuclear launch buttons. Now that's not going to happen, or if something like that does happen, it will not be the extinction of the human race. So again, a huge climate crisis could happen. I don't know anything about that stuff. Huge nuclear war could happen. It's just that some remnant of human beings, along with some remnant of the Orthodox Church, would survive it and continue existing until Christ came again. But anyway, it's crazy that we have the technology, the conceivable ability to destroy the world when 2,000 years ago you didn't. So these are not by any means guarantees that the end will come in our lifetimes. And I'm not making a prediction. But these are things we should look around. Jesus said to discern the times of time. Look around and be vigilant. Look around and say, oh, I do live in really weird and crazy and scary times. This should motivate my repentance. This should motivate me to get right with God. So what do we do given this information? The scriptures are clearly written when a sense of urgency is quoted. Before, we should live with the expectation that Christ could come at any moment, or at least that the end of the world could happen for us personally at any moment. We'll not get anywhere by prepping with food or weapons or other supplies. So there are, I've seen on TV, Christian prepper organizations that when the rapture happens, I have all this food and all these guns and stuff. It's that's not going to help you. That's absolutely not the point. Jesus was not telling you to stockpile or to arm yourself. He was telling you to repent and to get right with him. It's just, again, that sort of thing could be reasonable for other reasons if you're into that sort of thing. But it's not going to help you in the literal apocalypse. And the key thing to be worried about is the state of our souls. If we're right with God, we'll be okay. If we're not right with God, then nothing can help us. It's what it comes down to. Whether or not the final end comes in our lifetimes, we will certainly experience the end of our own lives, and eventually we will experience the end of the world. What kind of state we're in is anybody's guess. It's freaky to think about. Dawn?
This end of the world, how it says both the living and the dead will be raised, to be judged. So people who've already died, say they didn't do the right thing and they didn't die with Christ. Well, I don't know if we know, will there be a second chance with God, or will there be a judgment then? Or
so that's a good point. There's going to be, in a sense, there's going to be two judgments. There's going to be what's called the particular judgment, which is what happens right when you die. You're going to go either to be with the Lord or in Hades, but because your body's not resurrected, it's not the final state. So everyone who's dead, there are very, very few people in heaven right now. The vast majority of people who died righteously, they're just with Christ as a soul, but because they're not reunited with their bodies, they're in some other, we call it the intermediate state. Likewise, no one is in hell right now. No one is in actual hell right now. They're in Hades, which is, again, some kind of intermediate state for the unrighteous. And so heaven as such and hell as such will only be at the very end of, there's some saints in heaven. So the mother of God is in heaven because her body was taken up. The good thief on the cross is with God in heaven. Elijah is in heaven because he didn't die. So there are very, very few people in heaven, but there is this intermediate state. And then this intermediate state can be changed from worse to better. So at this time right now, people in Hades can get out of Hades through the prayers of the church, through the prayers of the righteous. So on Pentecost, which is coming up, we pray for mercy on all those in hell. People like Saint Silouan, spent his whole life praying for those in Hades. We use the word hell and Hades interchangeably. We shouldn't, really. We should get rid of the word hell. I think that's correct. There's Hades and there's Gehenna. Hades is what's going on right now. You can get out of Hades. Gehenna is the lake of fire, which you'll never get out of. That's horror of horrors, most terrifying thing you can imagine. And may no one ever go there. God help us. But anyone can get out of Hades right now through prayers. So you're supposed to pray for everyone. I have people in my life who I think, who I'm, rather sure didn't die right with God, and so I pray for all of them in my private prayers, and for those Orthodox, I pray for them in the liturgy as well. There's hope for everyone at this stage in time. There's coming a time when there will not be any hope, but there's hope right now, and that's a very good thing. That's a very, very good thing, and we should take advantage of it. We should pray for everybody, because even the worst, most awful people in the world, you can't wish hell on anybody. It's just, God help us.
Never had that explained so clearly. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's always been kind of murky about whether there's any hope for people who are in Hades right now.
Yeah, there's hope for everyone in Hades. I mean, ostensibly, there's specific people, like, there's that video I sent you where a holy man prayed for Judas, and God said there's no hope for him because he doesn't want the help. There are people, ostensibly, there are people who will not. You have to accept it, I suppose, in a certain sense, and there are people who will not. But we don't know who will and who won't, except, maybe Judas and the devil. So there's hope for everyone, and pray for everyone. And then there'll come a time when there's no hope, and God, it's just awful, awful, awful. But
can you touch on suicide?
yeah,
Because I'm seeing a lot of videos in Ukraine where people who are being blown up by drones who have no hope or just killing themselves.
yeah,
And I cannot imagine that these people in that state of terror and fear and pain are somehow just doomed to hell,
right,
because they made the wrong decision,
right,
in a state of fear and terror.
Right. Yeah. So it's a really good question to clarify the church's stance on suicide. And on the one hand, we have to stay. The church has always taught that suicide is a sin. The act of killing yourself it's rejecting the life God gave you, but it's also a statement of lack of belief. You are saying, I believe things will not get better for me. I do not trust in God. I believe it's oftentimes it's a statement of total unbelief, which is because it's saying, if I kill myself, and then it'll just go black. It's a statement of disbelief in heaven. So for that reason, we typically don't bury suicides in the church unless it can be proven that they were in a bad mental state, although very, very many of them were. So we have to say that suicide is a sin, because it is a sin, and there's no denying that. Even though all of us, including myself, have lost people to suicide, and it's a very tragic thing. We can't say it's a good thing. We can't say you're all right with God when that happens, because you're not. But at the same time, there's no one for who. So suicide is a statement of disbelief. It's a rejection of God, but that doesn't mean you're hopeless. And again, the number one extenuating circumstance is some kind of mental issue. We bury suicides in the church if there was a mental issue that clouded your judgment, and it wasn't. The archetypal example of a not good suicide would be like Hitler, killing himself in the bunker. He killed himself because he knew what people would do to him if they found him. And that's an example where he was very much not insane. What he was doing was, quite rational, but it was a sin to take his own life. But very many people do it, because they're in such an abject state of terror, or their minds are so warped or altered by their circumstances that they really aren't accountable for it in the same way that, Hitler was.
You would say that the terror and fear and just total horror around you could also be considered something like
it could be. I mean, God alone knows. You know what I mean? And and all we know is that at the last judgment, there's going. God is called the just and impartial judge, and the idea is that whatever verdict is passed on the last judgment on anybody, is no one's going to be able to argue with it, because it's going to be clear that God made exactly the appropriate choice. So it's perfectly conceivable that someone who died under those circumstances, even if it was like a sort of temporary insanity, they killed themselves, but they weren't in their right mind. It's conceivable. It is certainly conceivable that that person won't be judged so harshly. But again, I don't know, and I'm not making any pronouncement to that effect. They did choose to do a sinful thing, but that doesn't mean they're hopeless. And there are extenuating circumstances for virtually any sin, So we entrust it to God, and we pray for them. And I pray for the suicides I know in my life, and I haven't lost hope for them. And that's why I pray. If I had no hope for someone, I wouldn't pray for them. And there are special prayers you can read that were written by holy elders that Oh, I used to say it a lot. Seek out, O Lord, the lost soul of your servant. So and so. You alone know what. It was written by some Romanian elders or Russian elders. Very beautiful. Very powerful. So yeah, we pray for suicides. But we have to walk that tightrope of still acknowledging that it's a bad act, but not writing off the person as a hopelessly redeemable sinner.
Not to like drag.
No, please.
But something very closely tied to that I wanted to ask you about is the concept of dying defending someone being basically like I've kind of heard people joking with you like that's a straight ticket to heaven.
Yeah.
What I'll give you an example. That I had a friend when I was like 15, 16 who wasn't really Christian at all, but he got in a car accident with his younger brother and his father. They all went into a river, and Cody, my friend, got both of them to the shore and drowned.
Mm-hmm.
He was essentially doing what like a soldier would do, defending his platoon or something. What is the stance on that? Is that kind of like if you're outside of Christ, is that kind of like such a good act that you somehow? It's
certainly conceivable. I mean, again, I'm not going to make any kind of pronouncements because that would commit me to something. But it's certainly conceivable. Like if your last act in, if your last act of life is suicide, that's a very bad thing. If your last act of life is to sacrifice yourself to save others, I mean, isn't that exactly what Christ did? It's certainly conceivable that would, that was how God chose to save that person. He knew that person would die outside of him, but maybe by putting him in these circumstances where he would do this incredibly noble act. I'm just purely speculating. But you can conceive of these things. You still pray for him, obviously, and whatever judgment God will pass, the last judgment will be the right one. You can have hope. You can have hope.
Thank you, Father. I have to leave.
Yeah, I should close it down. I'll hang around. I'm at least ending
Thanks
this
a lot.
morning. God bless you guys. Christ our God, you have fulfillment of the law and the prophets. You have completed the divine plan of the Father. Fill our hearts with joy and gladness now and ever into the ages of ages. Amen. God bless you guys. I'll hang out for longer because that's how this always goes. But I'm going to end the recording. So.